Hey guys, and welcome to the Ban Rants channel, your home for NFL projections, predictions, and of course your periodic rant. And it's been a little bit since I've posted, but there hasn't been really a lot of football news to go off, so today's a bit of a rant. I'm going to talk about all the last place teams from last year, and we're going to see, out of all 8, which one of them has a chance to go from worst to first, if any, or if not, what sort of improvements we can expect to see. And I kind of covered this a little bit in some of the schedule predictions, but I'm going to go over it in depth with all 8 last place teams today. So if you like what you see here, please make sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below if you want to see me talk about something else, and we'll go ahead and start. So if you look at all 8 of the teams, I've put up their records from 2020 right next to obviously whatever team it corresponds to, and we look at all 8 of these teams, and just from a observational standpoint and just based on what we know about all these teams, obviously out of all 8, the one that has the most chance to go from worst to first would probably be the Niners. I mean, they were the reigning NFC champions in their own right last year. They were the NFC West champions as well. And of course, the injuries to Nick Bosa and a couple of people leaving in the offseason definitely affected this team, but it didn't actually make them look like a horrible team. I mean, we've seen the last place teams on this list look like last place teams. But in my opinion, the Niners were just part of arguably the toughest and most competitive division in the NFL. Obviously, the AFC North and the AFC West are becoming more competitive as well. But we had 3 teams with winning records in 2 out of these 8 divisions. And the San Francisco 49ers are honestly the only team on this list that didn't look like a team that was basically picking up the bottom of the barrel. And they have a lot of ways that they can get better. I mean, if Jimmy Garoppolo starts and obviously gets back to some form that he was 2 years ago, or if Trey Lance ends up being some sort of rookie breakout and he has a great season, that could also happen. But San Francisco's schedule is really not that unreasonable. I mean, there's a couple of games on there that are going to be a little bit interesting to see, but their division, it's tough. But I still think that they have a shot to improve the most out of any of these teams. I mean, a close second would maybe be Jacksonville or possibly the Bengals, but there's really not a lot of room for these teams to grow in terms of where their divisions are. I mean, the Jets and the Denver Broncos are in some competitive divisions. I don't expect them to really grow anything too much more, especially with the Patriots improving and the Dolphins getting a little bit better and Buffalo being so dominant in terms of the Jets. For the Broncos, I mean, you have Patrick Mahomes, and now the Chargers are starting to grow a little bit, and the Raiders are still a pretty decent average team. But out of all these teams, I mean, arguably, could any of them go from worst to first? I mean, we've seen a couple of teams do it. Ironically, both have been in the NFC. We saw San Francisco go from worst to first 2 years ago and be in the Super Bowl. They didn't quite win, but 2 years before that, Philadelphia went from worst to first and ended up winning it all. So we know it's possible, but it's very unlikely considering where all of these teams are now in terms of who's in their division now. But we do know injuries happen. We know that teams can have some breakout stars we didn't expect. We know people can have a resurgence in sorts of, if you think of a player like Joe Burrow, who was injured last year for the Bengals, their quarterback, could have a really good sophomore year. You could see Jalen Hurts take big strides in year 2. You never really know. But there's a couple of teams I think will do worse, mainly Detroit, because they lost a lot of good players, and they never really replaced them properly. I think the Jets are probably going to be about the same because their rebuild is going to take a couple of years. But I think that there's a lot of room for San Francisco to grow. I think Jacksonville, out of all these teams, has the most room to grow. I mean, you had 1 win last year, and that's a no-brainer. And I think that Jacksonville is also going to be a 2-year growth or 3-year growth, but I think it's going to be more smoother than the Jets are, just because the Jaguars have a lot more building blocks than the Jets do, which really doesn't mean anything. There's not a lot of building blocks that the Jags have that compare to a lot of the other building blocks in some of these teams, but they are in a decent starting place nonetheless. In terms of the Bengals, their division is extremely difficult. You have 3 winning teams, 3 playoff teams from last year. All 3 of their opponents are playoff teams. And, I mean, the Bengals where they did win against the division champion last year in their own right, which I think they're the only team on this list that might have done that. I could be wrong. I'd have to double check. But that is still pretty impressive. I mean, especially when you have your quarterback getting injured halfway through the year, there's no place to go from there. But the Bengals, in my opinion, I think out of all 8 of these teams could be in the worst position coach-wise, but I've already covered that in another video. When I look at all these teams, the one team that I really think, besides San Francisco, that could go from worst to first, and even San Francisco is going to have a really bumpy road with their division, it could be the Jaguars. It could possibly be a team like Philadelphia, just because their divisions are so weird. I mean, Tennessee improved a lot, so obviously a team that has improved, and more importantly, a team that has gotten the best of Jacksonville in their division, like Tennessee, it won't be easy. But I think that a lot of people don't expect any of these teams to be good, and that's where it gets dangerous, because with Jacksonville, you have Trevor Lawrence, all eyes are going to be on him. But if something else takes off and becomes a really big part of their offense or their defense, then Jacksonville could improve by a lot more than we're giving them credit for. They could be a 9 or 10 win team with a last place schedule. They could be a wild card team. I don't know about a first place, but obviously that would take a bit more metrics and possible injuries and possible drop-offs. But the only team on this list that I could really see going from worst to first would be either San Francisco or maybe Philadelphia, just because no team in Philly's division had a winning record last year. That will most likely change this year. But that's what I've really got for you guys. Bit of a short rant, bit of a play on words, but that's what I've got for you. I'm going to post a video later on this week about a different topic, and I'll see you in the next one.